It is a well-known fact that Donald Trump lies. He's repeatedly been called a pathological liar. In his first term in office, the Washington Post fact checker counted, for example, over 30,000 quote unquote lies told by Donald Trump. The interesting thing is, I actually don't believe Donald Trump lies or that he lies very often. I believe what he does is, in some respects, more disturbing. I believe he bullshits. The difference between bullshitting and lying is important. It comes down to what is the concept of bullshit and how it relates to truth. So, first of all, let's talk about lying. When a person lies, they know what the truth is and they make a false presentation as to what the truth is by presenting something false as if it is true. And the intent by which they do that is to get another person to believe that thing which is false as if it were true. And if you have those components, then you have a lie and a person who is lying. Bullshitting is different. Now, there are actually different types of bullshit, but this is actually a very serious conversation. So, Harry Frankfurt, back in 2005, published a little book. Really, it was a republication of an extended philosophical essay he had written called On Bullshit. And when Harry Frankfurt analyzes the concept of bullshit, he says that it differs from lying in that the person who bullshits, their purpose or intent is not to get the other person to believe something false. They could very well believe something false, but that's incidental to what the actual goal is. And the actual goal of is to get some other perlocutionary effect. Perfect example of this is the way a car salesperson will talk about an automobile. So the example I like to give, one example, is back in the late 1980s, I went to a Ford dealership and I was talking to the salesperson about the new Ford Mustang, and I asked if you could get the new Ford Mustang in T-tops. Well, it turned out that the fellow had a used older Ford Mustang in T-tops, and he told me you can't get the new one in T-tops, but I've got this older used model that I can sell you, which does have T-tops. In retrospect, I ended up finding out that you can back in 1989, I believe this was, you can get the new Mustang in T-tops. So you could think, well, the salesman lied. In fact, I don't think he lied. I think rather what he was doing was he wanted me to get the old used Mustang that he actually had on the lot. And so he did say something false, but the primary focus or purpose or intent of him doing so wasn't to get me to believe something false about Mustang T-tops. Rather, it was to get me to act in a particular way. He wanted to manipulate me by his use of language. And that is bullshitting rather than lying. Larry Frankfurt's point then is that the salesperson here, the salesman, bullshits because he doesn't really care whether the Mustang has T-tops or not. He will say whatever he can in the moment to elicit the effect he desires, which is me purchasing the older used Mustang. And that is the way that a bullshitter thinks about language. They're actually somewhat indifferent or apathetic about the truth value of the things they say. All that they want is to get a certain effect in the listener and to bring about that effect. And that is the way that Donald Trump time and again approaches truth. It's not that he lies so much as that he doesn't really care what the truth is. He will say whatever he can say to get about a certain effect in the audience that he wants. He wants to manipulate them, and he's just indifferent as to what the truth is. Now, Harry Frankfurt, when he was talking about this concept of bullshit, he says that in that respect, bullshit is actually worse than lying because a liar cares about what the truth is. They care enough to be precise about misrepresenting it. A bullshitter doesn't actually care about truth either way. All that they care about is whatever effect they can get. And I definitely think that Donald Trump. So I just want to give you one like 5-second example here from his press conference with Zelensky. Sorry, I referred to this as a press conference. It wasn't a press conference. It was informal meeting in the Oval Office in front of cameras, including the Russian media, by the way, which was supposed to follow. be followed by a press conference, but of course wasn't. So we're going to just join here this little clip where Zelensky is talking to Trump and then Trump talks back to him.
We are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid president, $350 billion.
You
We
voted
gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment.
Okay, that's what I'm talking about when I say bullshit. So let's debrief this. I don't know if you caught it there, but Trump says, we gave you $350 billion through this stupid president. He actually refers to his predecessor, Joe Biden, as a stupid president. And he says, through Biden, we gave you $350 billion, the United States. That's not true. That's false. So I looked it up. The Council on Foreign Relations, according to the Council on Foreign Relations, the US Congress, as of April 2024, passed a total budget approval for Ukraine of 175 billion, which is half of what Trump said here, 350 billion. There are other estimates as to what the U.S. government has actually given Ukraine, which are even lower, so about 125 billion. Whether it's 125 billion or 175 billion, it's not 350 billion. Trump just pulls that number out of thin air. But he repeats that number, 350 billion, 350 billion. Sometimes it's 300 billion. But he repeats 300 plus billion that the US has given to Ukraine. He just makes these numbers up. So then why does he do that? Well, again, I don't think the main point here is that Trump is lying per se. I don't think that Trump knows that in fact the US government has allotted 175 billion for Ukraine. I think that rather what he is doing is he doesn't really know or care what the number is. He just wants to get a massive number and repeat the massive number, perpetuating this misinformation as a way to dissuade people from supporting Ukraine and, in fact, to become more sympathetic to supporting Russia. So the point of making false statements about the numbers is not primarily to convey a false belief about what the number is that the US has in fact allotted to Ukraine. Rather, it is simply about um, marshaling within the US population anti-Ukrainian and pro-Russian attitudes. And that is classic bullshit. That's why he just makes numbers up on the fly. He will repeat those false invented numbers, sometimes change them, up them even higher simply because he wants to get a particular effect in the audience. That is what is so disturbing about this person. He's not simply a pathological liar. He's somebody who is pathologically ambivalent or apathetic, I should say, about truth at all. He doesn't care what the truth is. All he is a walking id, a narcissistic, self-interested ego who wants to aggrandize himself and will manipulate language in any way he can to get the effects of aggrandizement for himself from others, from praise and approval from others. That's all that he does with language. That's all he uses it for, and that's all he's interested in, not truth at all. That's why he's not a liar per se. He is a bullshitter, and why that is even more disturbing. Now, a footnote, there are other kinds of bullshit. I wrote an essay on this in a book some years ago, and I'll just say the other main kind, in my view, of bullshit was identified by the philosopher G.A. Cohn, where he says there's a kind of use of language which he said is unclarifiable unclarity. In other words, it is a use of language that is not only unclear but cannot be made clear. It conveys a surface sense of importance and significance and profundity, but in fact, dig deeper down, and that's all smoke and mirrors. There is actually no profundity there. You cannot clarify it into something meaningful and substantive. And G.A. Cohen believes, and I think he's right about this, that there are some fields in academia, particularly in the humanities, where there are insufficient critical checks on bullshit, and so unclarifiable unclarity as a type of bullshit can become predominant in some areas of the academy. And I think you also have to be very, very careful about saying, speaking out of your own ignorance and saying something is bullshit just because you don't understand it. So be very careful about that. Remember that people have a tendency, the less they understand about a particular subject matter, to overestimate their capability in that subject matter. So be very careful or cautious about labeling things unclarifiable, unclarity. Regardless, that's not our primary focus here. My primary focus has been on the type of bullshit that was analyzed by Harry Frankfurt, which is just a indifference to truth and a manipulation of language in order to elicit an effect. And that is exactly what Donald Trump does all the time. And it has a very, very corrosive impact on public discourse because it encourages that same apathy about truth in public discourse.